Hello everyone. Well, in this section we'll learn how to build API client repositories and controllers and how they're connected in our app. So I'll walk you through the complete process, so stick to the end. So for this one, first I'll take a look at our basic app example, and then we'll understand that why we need our API client repositories and controller and how they should be connected. Okay, now for that purpose I already have a demo over here. Now I'll click on this, and this is a live app, and this app is actually on the server. Okay, now over here, if I click on this, I go to a new page. If I click on this, I go to a different page, and now here I can add things, and I can add up over here, and then I can add to cart. Okay, if I add to cart, there's a response over here. Then I can close this one once again, but if I go back this one, I can see my previous cart which has been saved early, and over here I can add more stuff if I want. Okay, then I can come over here, I'll be able to see my cart, and over here I can also reduce or get more. Okay, now even after that I can go back to my home page, and I can come over here. This is my personal center, and over here I have my address saved, and I can save a new address from here. Okay, and then I'll come over here and save it. Okay, all right, and then if I come over here, I will see that I don't have any card history. Okay, like this, but this history is coming from our database. Okay, and this is the running order, and over here I don't have any information anyway, so I can go back to my home page, and if I come back again, I can scroll through them, and I can add more stuff, and then I can add it to the cart. After that, I will see that I have more information over here. Now I can go ahead and check out, click over here. Okay, and that's it. So I did that. Okay, now if I come over here, I'll see that I have a new order generated. Okay, sorry about that one. Okay, and this is my local history of my cart. Okay, so I can do much more information. Of course, over here I can log out, and then I can sign in once again, and that's what I would do. 13761849016. Now I can sign in. Now once I sign in, I see my information over here, the one I saved. Once again, I can go ahead and change my address if I want. All right, so you get the basic idea. So app like this, so this is a simple e-commerce app where you can make posts from the server, and Flutter framework gets it and process the data, and you can do whatever you like. So for app like this, you need to have your architecture ready to keep it up and running, because here we are doing actually a lot of things. Okay, now your architecture should be ready from the beginning, and it should be the right way, the correct way. So it's not a simple to-do app where you just go and do everything together. So you have to separate your logic, your UI, and dependencies. So that's why we need to learn how to work with API client repositories. And so for that one, I'll come over here, and I'll take a look at this basic structure, and here first I'll explain what are these things and how they're connected. Then we'll go ahead and build these things one by one. Okay, so anyway, so this is our basic Flutter app over here, and inside the app we have this main function. Now within main function we are going to call a function that's called init, but of course this init function we have to create on our own. In general, I mean, it's not in the main function itself, we have to create it, right? So we'll go ahead and create it. Now the main purpose of this init function is loading dependencies. As you can see, I wrote over here. So we'll load dependencies. You might have a lot of dependencies, but here I just listed 3. Actually, you can do more. Now, one of the most important dependencies is API client. So init function would load the API client. Now here the name is API because you can understand that from here we are going to call some RESTful API. So app like this, the one I showed you, it should talk to the back end, submit data and receive data. So Now this is a client side, so now it would go to the server from here, right? Make request or get data. So that's why we say this is a client. Okay, so server is this one that will serve our client. But anyway, it may sound very high level for beginners, but it's just nothing but a Dart file over here in our case, Flutter app. Okay, and in this API client inside, we'll have get and post request body. Okay, the actual body of this get and post request would sit inside API client. So in app, in general, you just want to have your only one get request, get method and one post method, and using those two methods you'll talk with the server, get for getting data and post for posting data. But your app could be complex, but how complex it is, it doesn't really matter. In general, you will have just only one get request and one get method and one post method. Okay, so hopefully it makes sense. Now so get and post request body are in API client. So now we need to call that body or the method. So the actual method is inside this API client. Now we need to call the method. Now in general, the methods are called from repository. But once again, repository just a Dart class over here because we are in Flutter app. Anyway, so we'll build a Dart class, and you can name it anything. It doesn't really matter. But the concept that we call this kind of Dart classes are repositories because it calls the get and post method. Remember, in API client, we'll have get and post request method as well as their bodies, right? And from here, inside the repository, we just call them directly, okay? Hopefully it makes sense. So body is there, you call the body from repository. So the main purpose of repository is just calling the methods. What methods? Get or post requests. That's all. So that's the simplest way of understanding. And in real life, when you go coding, you will see repositories, the Dart classes are pretty simple, and in general they are very small. Okay, and API client is a little larger than repositories. Okay, now next one we'll talk about the controllers. Okay, so now controllers process the data. Now where is this data coming from? A lot of time repositories get data from API client. Remember, if we have data, if we use get request, so that means we are getting data from server. Now API clients get the data from server because it is the body, it talks to the server, and server sends some data, and but of course we call that get method from repository. Now in return, both API client and repository, they return data. Okay, that data is passed to controllers. Okay, yeah, so now controllers, they process the data, and whatever the data that we are going to process, and after processing we send it to the UI and we redraw the UI. So that's how it works. But anyway, now take another look. So if you're going to, for example, make a get request, so from UI you will collect some data from UI you will call controller because you want to get some data, sorry, not collect data. For a get request from UI you will call the controllers. Okay, now then controllers will call the repository, and repository will call the get method in API client, and then API client will talk to the server. Okay, and the opposite for post request, well, definitely for post request, by the way, I think I need to talk more a little bit about this one, about get. So for get, once again, from UI we come to controllers, and from controllers we go to repository to API client, and from API client we talk to the server, and server processes the get request and sends data back to API client because it's a get request. So we get data, and then that data is passed to repositories, and repository pass the data down to the controllers, and from controllers we put the data to the UI, and then the redraw happen. So this is the whole cycle of controllers, repositories, and API client for a get request. Okay, now the opposite, if you have a post request, so in general from UI we'll collect some data, and those data will be sent to controllers, and controllers would first process the data, then it will come to repository, and then it will find the related get or post request. In this case, we'll find the post request, so we'll call the post request, and that post request sits inside the API client. Of course, at the same time, we are passing the data along this process. Now, API client would find the post request body or the method and sends the data to the server. Now, after sending the data to the server would process the data and send a response back to us. Now, once it sends a response, once again, it comes first to API client, then to repository, then to controllers, and then to the UI. So this is the basic structure that how it works. Okay, so hopefully it makes sense. So now we are clear what is API client, repositories, and controllers. Now we'll go ahead and take a look at firsthand how to build this thing actually. Well, now we are going to build init method, API client, repository, and controllers, and you can just follow along with me. And if you are following from any other tutorial just trying to understand this concept, you are still good to go. Just follow me, but I'll follow along with my project, the one I'm doing over here. But if you are not following this project, you can just simply make a simple Flutter app. I mean, just the beginner's app, the default one we make in Flutter app. Just go ahead with that one and follow along with me, and you're good to go. Okay. Now this is where we left last time, but this time we are going to build API client, repository, and controllers. So for that reason, we need to create some new folders. The first folder I'll call over here, I'll call it helper. Okay, all right. So this is a folder, and within helper I'll create a new file, and I'll call it dependencies. Okay, dependencies.dart. Okay, all right, that's all. Now over here we'll create a class. Well, we don't need to really create a class. We just create a method over here, and method type would be future, but it won't return anything, and the method is init, and then we'll just simply have this curly braces. Okay, all right. Now because it has future, the return type, so we need to use async, and that's all. Okay. And this is the init method that I was talking earlier. Okay, it's as simple as that. Okay, now once we are done with this one, once we are done with this, next we need to go ahead and create a class for API client. And once we create the class for API client, we'll call that class inside init method, and then we can call the init method from our main function. Okay. So that's why now we'll go ahead and create a new folder. So here I'll create a new folder, and I'll call it data, and inside the data I'll create another new folder, and over here I'll call it API. Okay, and inside API I'll create a new class, and I'll call it API client .dart. Okay, so here we'll go ahead and create a class, and we'll call it API client. And in our case, we're going to use getX for managing our API client, controllers, and repositories. So that's why we need to extend get connect, and then we need to implement another interface which is called getX service. Okay, all right. After that, we need to create some data variables for initialization. The first one we do late string token, because in general when you talk to the server you should have a token, and that token should be initialized inside your API client. Okay, so that's why we have a token over here. Now here I'll create another variable that is also string type, and we'll call it app base URL. Now this is the URL of our app, the app that would talk to the server, so server URL. Okay, so that's what we'll have over here. Now of course we'll pass this from somewhere else, the one calls API client. From there we'll pass it to over here. Now we'll create the constructor for API client, and here we have a required variable or parameters. So required this dot app base URL, and after that we'll go ahead and create a constructor body over here. Now we'll use base URL equal app base URL. Now we'll also use another parameter which is called variable here. We need to initialize it. That's called timeout. Now we'll give it a duration seconds 30. Okay, all right. Now you may ask, what are these two things? Now if you hover over on it, you see they are coming from get connect and connected dart. So this has to do with getX package management system, these two variables. So getX package management system should know what is your base URL, so you pass it to that one, and each time you make a request, so how long the request should try, and after that whether it should continue or not. So here you try a request or try to get data from the server for 30 seconds. Okay, keep sending the request, and after that if you fail you will stop it. Okay, so this is the timeout time, and we'll create another variable over here, and that would be map type, and it would be late type as well. Now the variable itself is a late type. Now here we'll have string and string. Okay, and over here we'll have a private variable. We'll call it main headers. Okay. Now what is map? Map is for storing data locally or converting data to map. We can do that as well. Now it has a key pair value, so that in our case we're expecting string as a key and the value is also string, but this is just for this variable. Okay, so here we are going to create a map, and map will have key and pair value type. The key is string, the value is string as well. And soon we'll see actually what is headers. Okay, I'm going to do that. Now here I marked it as late, so that means that before I go ahead and try to use this one, I should initialize it. So I'll initialize it inside the constructor, and here I'll call main headers. Okay, now once again, maps, they have curly braces. Okay, in general in Dart file, something that wrapped around curly braces, most of the time that's a map, and on the other hand lists are wrapped around this braces or brackets. Okay, so that's how you differentiate. So anyway, here we'll have a key and a value. So in our case the key is content type, and here we'll write application JSON and char set UTF, that one, and authorization UTHORIZATION, authorization, and bearer token. So let's see, and we need this one. Okay, now headers, why we have this API client and this headers. Now once again I said the API client is used to talk to the server. Now here we are going to talk to the server, but every time you talk to the server you need to mention the header in your URL, and that's why we are going to initialize this one. Regardless it's a get request or post request, you should have your basic headers ready. So when you want to get a response from the server, you tell the server, hey look, this is a get request, but I want you to send me JSON data. Okay, that's all. Okay, and this is also for the post request as well. So if you send a data to the server, server knows from the header that, oh, the JSON, the data is coming from the client, which means our app, or from this API client, that is JSON format. Okay, so that's why you need to mention the content type over here. And this is the decoding or encoding section, that how it should decode and encode. A lot of time this is not that important, but it's better if you have it. Now here, if you make a lot of post requests, in that case you should send a token from your device to the server. So that's why here we mention our token. Okay, and that's why we have this variable over here. Hopefully it makes sense. Now let's see. Yeah, and now this bearer thing. So a lot of time the token type is bearer, so you need to mention the type over here. Now this is used for authentication, and this kind of key is called authorization, because we want authorization from the server, and the token we send, that is bearer type. Okay, all right. So that's about our API client. Now we need to go ahead and create a class for our repositories. Okay, now in our case, once again, here we'll create a new class, and inside, and we'll call it we'll first create a new directory, and directory name is repository. Okay, all the repositories would live in this folder. Now here I will go ahead and create a new repository that would be a Dart class, and I will call it popular product repo. Okay, and Dart, you can name it anything you want, but in general a lot of time at the end they put this word called repo. Okay, that means repository. That's all. Now we are here, and as I said earlier, repositories are pretty simple. Okay, now I will create a class based on my repo name, so I'll call it popular product repo. Okay, all right, and here we'll extend getX service. Now the package has been imported automatically. Now repos talk to the API client, and that has to do with internet connection. So that's why a lot of time when you load data from the internet, you should extend this getX service. So just simply remember, when you load data from the internet, if you use a getX package, you should your class should extend getX service. Okay, yeah, that's all. Okay, now here we need to create a variable, and we'll call it final, and API, the type is final, and that variable will be API type client, and we'll call it API client. Okay, all right. Now over here we'll pass API client to product to our repositories, as we saw earlier over here. Okay, so they are connected somehow. Okay, so repository should have access to the API client, because if it has, then from inside repository we can call a method that is lived inside API client. Okay, so API repository should have an instance of API client, so that's why we are creating this one over here. Hopefully it makes sense. Okay, because if we have this one, now we can go ahead and call any kind of method that would live over here. Okay, so this is the instance. Now over here I'll go ahead and create an empty method, and method type would be future, and it would send me response from the server. Okay, and I'll call it get popular, the method name popular product list. Okay, and over here I would need to mention here the type, that should be async type. Okay, because it returns future. Now here we need to have a return section, otherwise it's being cranky. Okay, now we'll take care of that one. Now I forgot one thing though. Over here we need to create the constructor. Okay, so we do popular product repo. Now this is a required one, so we do required this dot API client. So whenever you call first time this repo, you have to pass the API client. Okay, all right, hopefully it makes sense. Now here we need to return something. Okay, return what? Well, as I said earlier, from repository you would call a method inside API client, but we don't have the method yet, so we'll need to go ahead and create a method. Okay, well for now we'll just create a post method, and after creating the post method we'll call the post method from here. Okay, now we'll come to our API client over here. So here we'll go ahead and create a get request. Okay, I mean get method, actually, not a request. So it would be future type, and over here we'll have response. By the way, if you wonder what is this response, actually this is the response would be from the getx package. Okay, because instead of HTTP client, here we'll use getx client for getting data from server, and getx returns a response to you, but of course inside the response you have your data. So the type is response over here. Now here we'll call get data. Okay, now get data should have the URI, okay, because you need to specify the URI, the URL for your server, I mean for the request, the endpoint. Okay, so here the type is URI. Okay, all right, and after that you should have well, we can have a lot more thing over here. I think for now I'll just keep it simple. Okay, and then I'll have this curly braces, and after that we have to return something. As you see here, the type is future response, right? Okay, now here first definitely we have to use try clause, this one. Okay, so inside the try we'll call something from the server. Okay, and if it fails we'll catch the error in our catch clause. Okay, all right, now over here we'll return a response. Okay, all right, now here, well, there are a lot of things that we need to take care right now. Well, the first thing, we want to create a get method over here, or get request. So that would be await, and then we'll call get, and within get we'll send URI. Okay, yeah, that's as simple as that one. Okay, now let's see, it's asking you to add async modifier. Okay, all right, now so it will get the data, and of course first it will wait for the data, and once it returns the data we'll save it in an object which is called response. Okay, all right, so and after that we'll just simply return the response. Okay, yeah, that's as simple as that one. Okay, but if there, sorry, response. Okay, now if there are problem over here, now we are going to return something interesting. So here, let's see, this is the response. Now as you see here, it takes status code and status text, some of them. Okay, so we'll go ahead and use 2 of them right now. So if it fails, we'll send a status code equal 1 and then status text. Okay, now the text would be coming from our error, so you do e.toString. Okay, hopefully it makes sense. Now with this we are ready. So this is a very simple request for getting data from our server, and of course in our case we are using get method from getx. I'm not using HTTP client. Okay, but of course getx inside it uses HTTP. Okay, so anyway, all it does is it's trying to get the data, it wait for the data. When data is returned, it saves the data in a response type object, and then we return. But if it fails, then we will return the fail and the error message, things like that. Hopefully it makes sense. Now we are here, over here inside this. Okay, as you said that it should return something. Now what it should return, well, before it returns, it needs to call the API from the API client, right? So here we can just simply go ahead and call it. We'll go return await API client dot get data. Okay, that's all. Okay, now here we'll pass a URL, endpoint URL. Okay, URL. That's as simple as that one. Okay, so now we are talking what we saw early. Now we are realizing this one. As I said early, so repository would call a method from the API client. So repository is just simply responsible for calling it, and that's what it does over here. Okay, of course this is not a correct URL. We have to build that URL somehow. Say for example http://www.debestack.com API product list. Okay, it should be something like that, but we have to create this one. Okay, all right, so that's what we learned. And at the same time we learned that once you get the data for GET request, first repository calls the data from the API returns the data to the repository, and then the repository would send the data back to the controller. Okay, so now we have to go ahead and create a controller, and once we have the controller we can get this data, because here you see it returns your response. Okay, so inside the controller we'll get that response and process it. So for this one I'll go ahead and create a new folder inside it, and I'll call it controllers, and inside this controller I'll create a new file and I'll call it popular product controller .dart. Okay, that's as simple as that one. Here I'll create a class and I'll call it popular product controller. Okay, now here it will extend getX controllers. Okay, no services, getX services in general, they're in repos. Okay, or inside API client. Sorry, over here I think we can close that one and this one as well. So anyway, so here we have this popular product controller. Now here we need to create a variable. That's what we'll do, and we'll call it popular product repo, and now here we would say popular product repo. Okay, hopefully it makes sense. Now here, before I go ahead and initialize it, so I need to pass the repo to it, just like the repo over here. Before you go ahead and initialize the repo, you need to pass the API client. Okay, so they're all dependent to each other. So now here, popular product, when we go ahead and initialize it, I need to have an instance of this repo, because if I have an instance inside this controller of this repo, then I can call this function. Okay, so that's why I need to go ahead and create this instance. But anyway, now here I'll create the constructor over here. Okay, now here required this dot popular product repo. Okay, this is something that you have to provide. Okay, all right, and after that here I'll create a list for now. Okay, and the list type I would create as a dynamic, and here I'll have a list inside of it, and the list name is popular product list. Okay, and we are initialize it to null. Okay, all right. Now why we are doing this then? Because as I said earlier, from here I'll call this repo, and now repo would return the data. So it will return data over here, and then I'll save the data to this list. Okay, hopefully it makes sense. Now here I would go ahead and create a method, and the method return type is future void, and I'll call the method name get popular product list. Okay, all right, and that's it. And over here I think I need to create this, have this async modifier, because the return type is future. Now I'll come over here. So now I have this instance of repo over here, so I can just simply go ahead and use that one and call a method inside of it. Now we know that inside there is a method, So the method name is get popular product list. I think, is it this one? Let me check it. Get popular product list. Yes, so this is the one. So from here I call this one, and this one will go ahead and find the data, find this method inside API client. All right, now API client would return a response. So repo will have the response over here. Now repo will return the response to me, okay, and I can catch it over here. Okay, I can save it. So anyway, so I'll first save the response as a response over here. Response. Now why I'm writing here response, sorry, now why I'm writing here response, because remember repo returns a response. So over here the variable should be saved in a response object, and now here it's yelling at me because over here I need to put await. Now the error should be done. Why we are putting await? Because over here that returns a future type. Okay, so we need to wait until we get the data. Okay, now once the data is ready, then well, so somehow it would return a response, either the correct response or a failed response. Either way we need to check it. So we would do response.status code if it's 200. Now in general, most of the API client, HTTP client, they return a status code of 200 if it is successful. Okay, most of them they return this one. So in our case, getX also returns status code 200 if the response is successful. That means if the response goes from here to here and then to here and then this one, not this one. When it returns from here, the status code is just, you see, it's different. Okay, yeah. So otherwise, when it returns from here, it will return to us 200. Okay, so anyway, we'll come over here. So if it returns the correct response, we'll save the data in this list. Before we go ahead, once again, I'll initialize it to null, because you may call it many times, this method. So if you don't initialize it to null, your data could be repeated. So first we'll initialize it to null, okay, and then I'll call popular product list dot add all. Okay, now over here you need to put your data. All right, yeah, that's as simple as that one. But now putting the data over here is not that easy. You have to have something. A lot of time we need to go ahead and build a model. Okay, and the model would get the response. Do remember, because from the server we get a response, and the response is part of the data. Within response we'll have part of the data, and our data is JSON type. So here inside we'll have JSON type data, but we need to convert that JSON type data to a model. Okay, so we need to go ahead and create a model, but we don't have that model yet. Okay, so we can't really go ahead and use it, but it gets you the idea. Okay, so for now I'll keep it empty, but of course it will show you an error. Okay, now once you have this one over here, most of the time you just want to update, because if you call this method, so that means the data has been updated and our UI would know. So this update is more like set state. Okay, this one. All right, now if it fails over here, okay, then you would want to return something different. Okay, and that is the idea of how you connect your controllers, repositories, and API client. Okay, now if this is successful, okay, now this list you can access anywhere in your UI. Okay, well, but to do that you just simply need to one thing. Over here you need to do like this: list dynamic popular product list get. I think get should be here. here popular product list. Okay, now why you don't want to call this one directly from UI? Because this is a private variable which has underscore. In Flutter, in Dart, if you have underscore, that marked as a private variable. So once the data has been saved here, and then you can just call this one from your UI, and this is a simple list. So inside the list, your data would be, say, for like this, A, B, whatever the data you have, like this. So you can just go ahead and read them. Okay, now before we want to see what actually happens, we need to go ahead and build a model. Otherwise, this is not just going to work. Okay, but you get the idea. So the most basic idea that how it works. Okay, so you have this init method. Inside this, it will have API, repository, get, post, and controllers, things like that. Okay, but now here's another thing is missing from the puzzle, that our init method. Okay, so now we'd go ahead and put data or the dependencies inside our init method. Okay, so for now I'll comment it out because otherwise I'll have an error. Now here I'll come over here, and this is our init method. Okay, now here you need to load the dependencies. Okay, all right, for Flutter getX, you need to just simply do get.lazyPut, and then you just call your dependencies from here. Okay, now in our case, the dependency is API client, the first one. In general, in dependencies, you want to load API client first. Okay, and here I think we need to import the library. Yes, now remember, it has a constructor and it takes data. So in our case, it takes app base URL. Okay, now here we need to pass a base URL. It could be anything like http www.debesttype.com. Okay, all right, let's see over here. I think we can import the whole package. Now let's go ahead and import the library, and the error should be gone. So as I said earlier, you need to load API client, and that's what we did over here. Okay, so remember, API client takes a constructor over here, and we are passing the base URL to it, and then it will save it to getX inside internally. Okay, so that's the first dependencies that we loaded. Now in general, after loading API client, you want to load the repositories. So here, that's what we do. You do get lazyPut. Now here we need to call our repositories. So our repository's name over here is a popular product. So I'll go ahead and copy that. Now here I'll just use this one, and now inside of this one, you should pass API client. Do remember that. Here it takes API client, right? So we already initialized API client over here. So now we could go ahead and pass API client to it. Okay, API client. Yeah, and now here we'll do get.find, and we need to import the packages. All right, okay, now here, so we created an instance of API client. Now of course it's not here directly, but because we are inside getX package, so once you write API client get.find, getX will find it for you. But of course this name has to be same as the name you mentioned over here. If your name is a bit different over here, or whatever the name you use over here, you have to use exactly the same name. Okay, now these two names are all same, so now getX can find the related class for it. Okay, so in our case, this is the API client class. Hopefully it makes sense. All right, so this is for repo, right, or repositories, repos, and this is our API client. Okay, and next here we'll have our controllers. Okay, yeah, now the same way we have to go ahead and load our controllers. So in our case, I'll just copy this one. Now instead of popular product repo, I'll call the class name is popular product controller. So this one, and I'll come over here, I'll replace this one. Now over here, first we need to import the package. And now we see that this controller takes product repo, right? So we need to pass the repo to it, and we already initialized over here the repo. So, and the variable we created, that's popular product repo, we'll copy this one and I'll just replace this. Okay, and it's gone. So this is how you correctly load your repositories in a function. Okay, first API client, then all the repos and all the controllers. So you might have a lot of repos, so all the repos try to load together, and then you might have a lot of controllers, and all the controllers you load together here one by one after another. Hopefully it makes sense. Well, then we'll have to come to our main file over here, main.dart class. Now, as I said earlier, this init is called from main. Okay, so this is what we'll do. Now here we have to import our dependencies package, so which is inside the init method, and so let's go ahead and import it. So here we do import. Now here the package, well, I think that's inside a helper folder, and the class name was dependencies, the file name, I'm sorry, this one, and we'll import as dep. Okay, well, it makes sense. You can name it anything you want. Now here, before you start to load your main app, or before you start to run the app, try to load your dependencies here, and that's the general convention. So here we need to do await, and we would do dep.init. Okay, and this is how your dependencies are loaded, okay, before the app starts to run. Okay, but to make sure that dependencies are loaded and you wait, so here inside Flutter we use another function that's called widgets flutter binding dot ensure initialized. So with this method over here, it will initialize that, it will make sure that your dependencies are loaded correctly and wait until they are loaded. Okay, yeah. So now with this, we're pretty much done about this section, but only thing here it's missing is this model. As I said, if we don't go ahead and create a model, we can't really get, I mean, we can get data from server, but we won't be able to show the data in the UI. Now, another thing we also need to solve over here, like if we come to our repo, all right, now this one is hard-coded. This has to be dynamic, okay? Or this link has to be saved somewhere else. So that's what we'll go ahead and do next. And then we need to go to our endpoint, which is server side, and we have to have a method called list, okay? That list would return the data. So two things to do. Well, the first thing we'll do next is go ahead and build a model. And once that has been done, we'll go ahead and create this endpoint in the server. And then we'll be able to show the data inside our controllers. And then from UI, we'll just simply call this method or this field over here.